today Allison Miller, who is the Research Portfolio Senior Manager at the Schmidt Ocean Institute. We have Dr. Catherine Bell, Associate Professor at the Australian National University and founder of World of Drones and Robotics Congress, and Dr. Nerida Wilson, who's the Manager of the Molecular Systematics Unit at the Western Australian Museum. Thanks so much to all of you for joining, and I will now pass over to Hannah to kick us off.
Thank you so much, Peter, and welcome everyone. Good morning, good day, good evening. Happy International Women's Day. I am honored to be here today with incredible women working to advance science and technology, as well as opportunities for other women in Australia and around the world. Today, we are joined by Dr. Catherine Ball, Dr. Nerida Wilson, and Allison Miller. Catherine Ball is an acclaimed speaker and author and scientific futurist. She is involved in several ventures geared toward advancing technology, such as the World of Drones and Robotics Congress. She is passionate about community science and demystifying technology, as well as mentorship. Catherine is an associate professor at Australian National University. Hi, Catherine.
Hello, I'm also really into my SciComm, so I've just tweeted our YouTube channel live. So I'm sure everyone who's watching this already knows that because they're watching it. But one of the things I might like to ask people to do is amplify the fact that we're here and we're talking about this online. I've just tweeted it. So great to have everybody today. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's wonderful to have you. Thank you for being here. The YouTube link we had originally set up was not working, but we have a new one working now. So if you go to our YouTube site, you should be able to find that link. I can also put it in our chat so that we can share it. So thank you so much for tweeting that. Our other guest is Nerida Wilson. She is an accomplished scientist, having published 90 scientific papers, led several oceanographic research expeditions, and has 4 species named after her. Nerida is a molecular biologist by trade and currently manages the Molecular Systematics Unit at the Western Australian Museum. She is also passionate about promoting diversity and inclusivity in the scientific community. Welcome, Nerida.
Thanks so much for having me.
And finally, we have Schmidt Ocean Institute's Allison Miller. She is the Senior Research Portfolio Manager at Schmidt Ocean Institute and has spent her entire career supporting oceanographic research in the nonprofit world. She is an avid swimmer, has dived in the deep submersible vessel Alvin, and has been seasick on Falkor. She was also the science editor for the children's book, Ocean Hide and Seek. Welcome, Allison.
Thanks for having me, Hannah.
Great. And so with that, I'm going to kick it off with some questions. SOI has been supporting ocean science in Australia for the past year now. I'm pleased to share that 6 of the 9 expeditions in Australia have been led by women scientists, and all 9 expeditions have had at least one female principal investigator. So I guess a question for Catherine and Nerida: what has this opportunity meant for the scientific community in Australia?
Nerida, do you want to go first?
Yeah, I'll kick off. I think most people here realise that Australia has a super long coastline. So I think in general, it's, if you include islands and things, it's around 60,000 kilometres, which is about 37,000 miles. So we have a ton of things to look at and to understand and to document. So that's a huge challenge in itself. And we don't have a dedicated scientific ROV. So having Schmidt Ocean in our neighbourhood for such a long time has been amazing and has just opened up so many opportunities. And the way you share with everyone, it really, I think, has a greater impact in communicating what we're finding and what we're seeing. So it's just been an amazing time.
Awesome.
Just want to say how refreshing it is actually to see science, like pure new innovation and science, actually on a news headline. During a time where the world has been in a state of flux, we haven't had very much good news. So the fact that, the SOI Falkor and the crew managed to find, one of the world's longest deadly jellyfish, Must have been some mild relief for a lot of parents who were trying to tell their kids some good news stories. Guess what? Something else that's going to kill you has been found in Australia. And so I think that was, I just loved seeing that. And I feel like one of the things that's going to be on the back of this pandemic is that there's going to be an increased interest in science. And I think for me, though, I've always been interested in science. So maybe I'm biased because I see it the other way, and that I want to see more of what I know is already happening, let alone get more and more people involved. But the beauty about having the Falkor around Australia, of course, is that we've actually managed the COVID pandemic really well. So it's been a really great symbiotic relationship, or mutualism, maybe to use a better term, a really good mutualism between the Australian scientists and having the Falkor here, because we could have you here because we were pretty much COVID zero. We weren't completely COVID zero, but pretty much COVID zero. Here in Queensland, one of the biggest things that got everybody talking, and I heard this was when it becomes pub talk. Now, when the SOI becomes pub talk, you've made it in Australia, was the fact that there was a brand new reef discovered on the Great Barrier Reef in the marine park there. Because we forget, I think, because the land is so well mapped and is, remote sensing can show us so many things about planet Earth. Planet Ocean is still not mapped. And I don't think people fully realize the diversity that we have in our oceans, because they can't touch it, feel it, smell it. Most people don't scuba dive. Like the majority of human beings don't scuba dive or get to go down in a submersible. And this is where I get really excited about what we can do with some of this data going forwards. And I know that SOI and others are working on this, is how do we put some of this information into a video game? How do we put it into virtual reality? How do we put it into a haptic suit? And one of the things that I remember the executive director of SOI, Jyotika Vamani, when I worked with her on the X Prize, on the Underwater Ocean Mapping X Prize. And she said to me, the ocean is the world's largest undiscovered museum. We've got so many things down there. And if you put that into the context of the Great Barrier Reef, that didn't exist 5,000 years ago. And we've had continuous, human civilization in Australia for 60,000 years. That means that in First Nations Indigenous Australians watch that sea level rise. They watch that come up. So I'm really excited to see what else we discover when we're mapping in high resolution, some of the human aspects, as well as Mother Nature aspects of the Great Barrier Reef, and that beautiful relationship between humans and country that Indigenous Australians have. I'd just like to acknowledge as well that I'm sitting here in Brisbane, which is the Yagara and Turrbal people. And the point in Kangaroo Point, where I'm sitting here now, has been a meeting point for discussion and friendship and innovation for thousands of generations. And so I'm very privileged to live in Australia. And just wanted to thank SOI for spending time here, because there's still so much more to discover.
That's awesome. Thank you so much, Catherine. I guess to kind of follow up on hearing all of that and being a part of SOI, it's been an honor being in Australia for the past year and helping to facilitate all of the amazing discoveries. I guess another question would be, how has sharing these experiences and opportunities impacted young women in Australia?
Well, I think Catherine really touched on that too, with the live streaming and the way that the work has kind of entered just the public conscience. I guess it's just accessibility in one way. Like, it really is that unknown place that you don't see. So if you can suddenly see it for hours and hours each day, it really normalizes discovery and exploration, and it's just so accessible to people that might not even be able to leave their house for health reasons. So I think there's just been an enormous broadening of accessibility to science, which is just amazing. And it doesn't matter. It's just been an incredible kind of absorption into the community, which is really a wonderful thing.
Awesome. I think that young women and young men need to see women doing this work, because we're still not the majority. In some parts of science, we're about equal, but certainly not engineering, and certainly not most sciences. I think in marine biology, we're probably the most equitable of some of the environmental sciences, to be honest. Agriculture, we're probably not. Environmental science tends to be much more balanced than other parts of STEM. But that doesn't mean that we don't need to actually highlight the fact that women were leading these expeditions. Because I think we still need to show that women do these things. It's just a terrible culture change takes a long time. It's a terrible thing that it takes so long. But, you know, when I go out and I ask people, you know, who's Kim Kardashian, they can tell me who Kim Kardashian is. But when I ask them who Elizabeth Blackburn is, they have no clue. And if you don't know who Elizabeth Blackburn is, have a Google, because Elizabeth Blackburn is a Tasmanian Australian who has a Nobel Prize in medicine, who basically discovered the key to aging. So, you know, with telomeres. And so she's a Nobel Prize winner. Now, one of the big passions of mine is for us as a country, and I am an Australian British dual citizen. I'd like both the UK and Australia to do this, and any other country too. The US would be fabulous to do this. Can we start celebrating science the way we celebrate sport? You know, we really do have pages and pages in the newspaper of all the sports activities, and that's great. I love sports. I'm not saying we shouldn't celebrate sports, but where are the pages and pages and pages of the scientific discoveries and the people that work on them and the teams that are working on it? So I think it's a really great question to ask. How has this work and prioritize, showing these women as leaders in their field, how does that affect younger women? Well, for me as a younger woman, I needed those role models. They didn't really exist. And the fact is, we don't celebrate our role models enough unless there's controversy. You know, they don't get headlines. So the good news stories get lost. And that disappoints me, because there's a whole opportunity there for conversations with boys and girls about what people can do.
I think that's an excellent point. Yeah, thank you both so much for that insight. Allison, you have the unique job of working behind the scenes with scientists to support their research projects. What is the importance of having a diverse group of people working together on an expedition?
Thanks, Hannah. Yeah, I know we're here, of course, for International Women's Day, but I think in this scenario, when I think of diversity, I think of backgrounds and educational diversity. And a cruise doesn't just happen with the scientists on board. It takes a lot of technicians and engineers and program managers that are helping get all the paperwork organized and helping get all the data shared. So I think it's important to remember that there's a diversity of backgrounds and roles with every cruise, and that we can, you know, there's a place for everyone in science, no matter how far you want your school to take you or which direction you want to go. And I think that's really important to remember from a program management perspective as well.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And I think that since joining Schmidt Ocean Institute, just the variety of scientists we bring on board Falkor has always been so impressive to me. Are there any personal experiences that influence the way you approach scientific partnerships, Allison?
Yeah, I think actually from a personal perspective, when I went to grad school, I knew I didn't want to be an academic scientist. That kind of life was not for me, and it wasn't something I felt like I was really good at. So I kind of went into grad school looking for exposure to different careers, different classes, and I had a great mentor that really encouraged me to explore that. And so and I didn't even know kind of what jobs really existed to do that, but I knew I wanted to be close to the science without necessarily having an academic position. And so I really tried to do that every day, just support whatever the science needs and whatever the scientists need me to do, and help them be successful any way I can. So that's kind of the personal experience that I bring to supporting all of the scientists while they're out on Falkor.
That's so great. And I guess another follow-up question to that, what does it mean to you when to see and work with so many women scientists?
It actually means a lot to me. When I was in grad school, I never had a female professor, and I don't want to take anything away from my excellent male advisor, but I was the only female in the program and didn't really have a mentor or leadership person to look up to that was female. And so now that I've gone throughout my career in kind of the nonprofit world and have been surrounded more and more by female leadership and female scientists, I think having those role models for other women and also for myself as I go through my career is really important, because it's not something I had when I was a student.
It's really great. Nerida, we're going to pivot to you now. How did you navigate the ocean science space, and how can other young women do the same?
That's a great question, because I think it changes a lot with time. And certainly not very late in my career, but I also feel like the landscape's changed a lot from when I was in grad school. So, so many similar things. Like I didn't have real female role models. There was no woman scientist I knew that I wanted to be like. I had no access to the ocean science space at all. So it's this question in a way, because I was like, I don't think I even thought that was a thing I could do. So, I finished grad school and I took a postdoc in the US and stayed there for a few years to try and access opportunities. And, I think that's changing. I think there are more opportunities in Australia now, but, I sort of actively pursued things I didn't know, which I've never really stopped doing. So it was a different kind of a journey. I don't like to think that people have to move around a lot to do that. Some people can't for family reasons and health reasons. And so I really like to push to make those opportunities available for everyone, and within country, I think is really important as well. So I'm pretty dedicated to kind of expanding those opportunities for people.
Yeah, that's so great. And I guess a really awesome follow-up question to that is, how does the diversity of your collaborations affect the way you do research now?
Yeah, really great question, especially, I guess, because I'm in a museum and not a university. I'm lucky to have a broader diversity of collaborations, and the kinds of projects that I do aren't always pure science. I think it's really important to remember that you can make wonderful scientific contributions from all kinds of places. And I think we really need to drop this kind of academic snobbery business that means you can only do things in a top university. People are just doing wonderful things no matter where they are. And that's another thing to really take to heart, I think. That's probably it.
And I think that's really amazing, and such a fair point that science can really happen anywhere. It doesn't actually always have to happen at the university. It could happen in your own backyard with your children. Observation and curiosity knows no bounds, right? So I guess another question for you is, what do you think is the biggest challenge for young women pursuing careers in science today?
Yeah, I guess it sort of links a little bit to the previous point, which I didn't finish answering properly, that I think the biggest challenge you are by so many challenges. We have this, incredibly changing environment around us, and there's all kinds of things going on, governments and otherwise, and all these things are linked, but it's easy to sort of feel a bit powerless and a bit overwhelmed. And so I think the biggest challenge is being able to focus in when you need to and just concentrate on moving forward. And I think having a diversity of scientific collaborators and friends and support networks are really key to that. People who keep you grounded, tell you to just get yourself together today, and other times just give you a hug. It's really important to build that community around you. No one works alone. No one that I know, no one that's still going, right? And, recently someone reminded me of that wonderful quote of Winston Churchill, which is, if you're going through hell, keep going, don't stay there. So I think, take your little band of support and just keep going and learn how to kind of tap out a little bit when you need to look after yourself.
I think that's really great advice. I again, just listening to this conversation, recently finished grad school and would have not survived if it was not for the people around me, and for all the amazing collaborations I got to be a part of. And I guess also going on along with collaborations, Nerida, do you have any exciting projects coming up soon?
Well, I'm very excited to be coming back on board really soon. So in April, we're going to check out the mesophotic reefs of Ashmore Reef, which is kind of a remote territory from Australia that's like right at the edge of the continental shelf, and it kind of looks a bit closer to Indonesia than to Western Australia if you squint. So I'm very excited to come back on board and to and get some really fabulous science done. So yay.
We're very excited to have you back on board. Catherine, we're going to move on over to you now. Your work in technology, especially your advocacy for girls in tech and STEM fields, is inspiring. How can we use technology to serve our communities and the environment?
Oh my gosh, we don't have long enough to that today. Well, look, the work that I've been doing with girls over the last few years is, again, I think, to fill that niche, fill that gap between the Kardashians and the Elizabeth Blackburns, to allow people to have tangible role model, real people that turn up at their school that do real things. And I think that there is something to be said to support teachers in their endeavours, not put more burden on teachers, but to support them in what they're trying to do. And one thing we know is that schools are overwhelmed. The pandemic has made that even more so. Teachers really came to the plate when the lockdowns happened and all the homeschooling happened. There's so many things we can discuss there around the digital divide and the assumptions that were made about the ability to homeschool, assuming that everyone has a laptop at home, which some kids don't. And some kids, home is not a safe place. A lot of different ways that we'd have handled this differently, I'm sure, when the next one comes around. But putting the pandemic to one side and looking at the bigger picture, it's been an journey to try and encourage, and I get backlash every now and then, but to try and encourage girls and women to try new things. You're up against so many stereotypes, you're up against so many assumptions that people have been telling them, and biases are unconscious. And women have biases just as much as men. And we have been fed the same media input. We've been fed the same status, girls are bad at maths, or they can't, girls aren't good at spatial stuff, so they can't reverse park a car. Excuse me, I can reverse park a car into any space required, right? So it's like, girls are good at maths. Some of the best maths people I know are women. And I was actually, I wish I'd loved maths. I wish I'd paid more attention to maths. I think one of the key messages that I'm saying now, though, and this is slightly controversial, is that we can tell girls and women, that STEM jobs are really exciting, and you get to see places in the world, you get to fix some of the world's biggest problems, and absolutely all of that is true. But the message that I'm trying to put across, apparently boys react to it better than girls, but I'd like to challenge that assumption and actually keep doing it anyway, which is that if you have a qualification in maths, you can get a really well-paid job. If you get a job in STEM subjects, really, if you get a job in engineering, you can have an incredibly well-paid job in an incredibly long career, and you can make money doing things that you want to do, working on projects that you want to work. The fact financial choice is one of the fundamentals of the female liberation movement. The ability for women to control their money, the ability for girls to look at this as a job, amazing work that they would do, but actually a way that they can afford to live the life they want to live and have choice in their life. So the reason why I think that's an important conversation is my PhD gave me access. Because of my PhD, I had enough immigration points to move to any country I wanted to. Australia, I'm very glad, welcomed me with open arms 11 years ago. And I met my now husband. I've had my 2 children, and I'm settled here in Australia now. And I am an Australian, but I could have gone to the States, I could have gone to Canada, I could have gone to anywhere in Europe, I could have done anything I wanted because I had that education. So there's 2 conversations that I think that really need to start having more with women and girls, is that if you would like to have the life you want to have and travel when we're allowed to travel again, and make choices and, dress or, do your hair or do anything you want it to be, money gives you that choice. And I remember a wonderful interview with Cher once, and I don't think we ever thought we'd mention Cher during this morning's discussion, but I'm just going to mention Cher for a second. When her said to her once, "Oh, you need to just go and marry a rich man." And she turned around to her mother and she said, "Mum, I am a rich man." And I think, if we look at the fact that women having power and having is still seen as such a controversial hot topic that, we don't talk about money, it's rude. I'm sorry. If we're going to get rid of the gender pay gap, we need to start talking about money. This leaders background to women and girls working in technology and STEM. Some of the most exciting egalitarian emerging technologies that are going to be part of business as usual across our economies, but also part of our lives as usual, are still in very male-dominated businesses. They need to have more women around that table. And if you want to get around the table in a tech business, you need to have STEM qualifications. If you want to sit around the board in a large company making decisions about carbon footprint, water footprint, ocean protection, life cycle analysis, the circular economy, do you think you're going to make more impact if you're outside shouting or if you're around that table making decisions? And so I think for me, and tech careers are a point of female empowerment that I think we need to apply a little bit more energy to. Did I just start ranting? I just started.
I think it was a fantastic rant though, and couldn't agree more. I guess another question to follow up to that is, what inspires you personally about the young women that you mentor and work with?
When I was pregnant with my first son, I was on a TV show here in Australia called Q&A. So it's like the big political, sort of ask the politicians show. And apparently I was the most heavily pregnant woman they've ever had on that program. I think I still retain that title. And so part of me took real pleasure, actually, in being a heavily pregnant woman, while still doing speaking work, still doing presentations, still doing school visits, and being on the television as a heavily pregnant woman that was running my own career. Because I think there's a myth that we are sold, which is you either have to choose family or career. This whole thing of, how do you find the balance? Can we just stop talking about balance? Balance doesn't exist. Balance is just another stick with which we beat women up to make us feel like we're failing. There is no such thing as balance, but there is such a thing as choice. And every day we get given choice as to where we spend our precious time and our precious energy. And when you're a mother, particularly as well, though it is, even if you're not a mother, and you know what, it's perfectly to not be a mother, just as much as it's perfectly okay to be a mother. The point is that you have choice. Life can get very complex very quickly. And I think that when I've worked with younger women, said to me, oh, Kath, how do you do this? How do you have a family? How do you have a job? I was like, you just do it. You just do it. You get up in the morning and you do it. And if life is heavy, you take it 10 minutes at a time. You just keep going. As to quote the, Winston Churchill going through hell quote, I love that quote. You just keep going. And so I think the biggest thing for me is really the technical. Getting girls and women into the technical conversations is really easy. We've been doing that for a number of years about the wonderful careers and the problems that we can solve. But figuring out about whether we have children and still have that, the answer is yes, you can, actually, because I'm not special. I'm not Superwoman. And, I've made choices to enable my life to do that. One of the choices was I waited till I was late having children. Now, I look at it now and I wish I'd had them 20 years ago because I'd have had a lot more energy. Let's put it that way. I'm 41. I feel like I'm 101, but I don't actually. I actually really love my kids and I love spending time with them, and they're just geniuses and I love them. They're fabulous. They're both boys and they're going to be the best feminists ever. They just love women and girls. They're just fantastic. And so I think, to wrap up my rant again, I wrap up my ramble again. The thing that inspires me about those young women is that when they see it, you sort of see this relief pass over them and they take it on board and they recognize, actually. And I think just watching young women getting empowered just by living and breathing and seeing other women's experiences, it's a tangible thing. And I get a real buzz out of that. The fact that you can just, destroy pieces of the patriarchy one person at a time. There you go.
That's awesome. And I guess a really great question maybe for the group now, to kind of jump off of the parenting conversation, is being a working mother is a balancing act on regular days. What are your thoughts on what can be done to accommodate parenthood in the professional world?
Who wants to take that one?
I couldn't find my unmute button for a second. Yeah, that's a really tricky question, I think, because each part of the professional world is really different, and there's different pressures and there's different patterns and different judgments and cultures. So I kind of like the idea of just trying to make it work for you wherever you are. And I think, so I'm a scientist that has chosen not to have children. But feel the responsibility of speaking up for making those opportunities and flexibility, because no one can accuse me of sort of self-interest, which I find so irritating, annoying when people do try and make improvements and changes to the workplace. So I kind of take that responsibility pretty seriously. I'm lucky enough to work in a government workplace that has quite flexible working arrangements. I mean, there's always limits to those things, but I think a lot of it is just trying to have sensible and good relationships with management, because at the end of the day, no matter what rules and regulations there are, it's really about whether your peers are accepting of you having to go and do other things and work in odd hours and things like that, or if they're not. And that changes the whole culture of the place. So I guess like with any inclusive workplace, it's about recognizing the humanity in other people and just understanding, even if you don't know why that person's disappearing, you know, they might have some hidden health problem you don't know about, or all kinds of things like that. So I think it also comes back to having, you know, more role models, more just women working and visible, because I think when we had fewer role models, and you know, we all have biases. So I think just kind of flooding the market, so to speak, is the best way. We all need to just step up together and show what a diversity of lifestyles and careers, I think, and ways of living are possible within a scientific career. So, yeah.
I think I couldn't agree more, Nerida. That's an excellent point, that there are just so many ways and lifestyles, and that it is kind of an act of supporting one another. A quick reminder, if you are currently watching us on YouTube, you are more than welcome to ask questions in the chat for our amazing panel, and we will do our best to answer them. Another question for the group, COVID-19 has been a part of our lives now for over a year, but this pandemic has been affecting women in their careers in a substantial way. How has your professional or personal life been affected?
Who wants to start? Shall I grab this one for a moment, and then maybe Alison, I'd like to hear your voice more than my own, but
no, go ahead.
I come at this from Australia, and in Australia, we locked down really hard, really fast, which meant that we're lucky that right now in, I think, all states and territories, we have zero community transmission, and our vaccination program has started rolling out. So we're coming at this from the best possible angle. In terms of my work, I actually onboarded at the university in April last year during the pandemic. So it was a big test to see how much as an academic you're actually able to do remotely. And they sent me I'm drinking out my mug this morning. They sent me my mugs and I haven't got an ANU t-shirt on, unfortunately, but they sent me all of the gut, and I just felt really included, and that was lovely. But there was a lot of this, there was a lot of screen chat, a lot of screen time, and I was terrible at putting breaks in between meetings. So I don't know about everybody else, but I'm looking forward to getting back to a sort of a mixed way of working. Obviously, I wasn't needing to do field work, so I wasn't out on a vessel or trying to get anywhere like that. But I can imagine being out on the Falkor, where you know you're COVID-free and you just float around a beautiful ocean. Must have been such a liberating feeling against what we're seeing across the rest of the world and the horror show that's been unfolding across a lot of our families and a lot of the places that our families live. The biggest thing for me, I think, really has been that it's shown that we can work in a different way. And I just want to give a nugget of an experience that happened to a friend of mine that worked in the financial industry. So she's a working mother, and she was wanting to have one day a week working from home. Now, the taboo of working from home or flexible working, despite all of the nice things that people say in their corporate social responsibility brochures and their employment brochures, there was still a taboo about working from home. And I think that taboo has had a nuclear bomb put underneath it, because my friend was waiting for 6 weeks to get approval to have one day a week working from home. And then COVID hit, and then everyone was working from home full time. And suddenly the managers realized this can work, this can be done. Now, this is, I think, going to be benefits to all of us, not just parents, but also people who aren't parents, because it will build flexibility and the ability to build things around your lives that you need to get done in ways that you wouldn't necessarily. The one thing, though, as well, people have said to me is, oh, it's been great to see people's kids and been great to see people's pets and been great to see all of that. And I'm like, yes, but there is also a line in the sand that needs to be drawn between people's professional and personal lives. And I've heard people who've got, people who they work with who they don't want to see where they live. They, for personal safety reasons and for various other reasons, there's a line in the sand that needs to be drawn between that sort of the fourth wall of work. Actors have the fourth wall on the stage and TV. So for me, COVID, the biggest thing has been that it's turned on its head a lot of assumptions about different ways of working. And I'm really interested because in an academic sense, we have a great flexibility of working. We have some of the best unionized workers' rights, pay conditions, flexible working conditions. I would like to see that in the corporate world. I never had that in the corporate world. And so the ability now for those whole ideas of you must be in the office 9 to 5 if you don't turn up, even if you're working till midnight the night before, if you don't turn up till 10, you're not turning up till 10. And it was all based on times on a timesheet rather than outputs and KPIs. I do hypothesize, and maybe we can check in a year's time and see if this has happened. I hypothesize that we're going to drop to a 4-day working week, because I think the efficiencies that you make on a 4-day working week means that you have more productive, happier and healthier staff. And one thing we know is that an army might march on its stomach, but an economy marches on its healthcare and its public health. And I think that's going to be a whole new set of conversations as the mental health ramifications of COVID-19, once the virus itself passes, and we have to deal with the effects that this has had on people by putting them in isolation and removing them from some of the support networks they might need. Sorry, Alison, how's it affected you?
So when I saw this question in our outline, I was kind of thinking a little bit more of an optimistic approach and like what positive things that it's brought to our lives. At the end of 2019, I was really burnt out on travel. And I just remember saying to my husband, I just want to be home. And so looking back, be careful what you wish for, because I definitely got my wish. But I think just if you can set aside kind of the 24-hour news cycle and that everyone was working and living and doing, all of their lives in the same space, just being able to slow down a little bit and not have the pressures to go and get on the next flight to go to the next meeting or do things like that, and just try to like take a walk around the block to end the workday, to separate, getting up from your computer. Or I started trying to like read for 1 hour every evening. And some of those things I think will also stick with us a little bit, Catherine, just kind of letting go of the pressures to constantly be on the go. I really found a great value in, and unfortunately it was kind of forced upon us, but I hope some of that sticks as well. And Nerida, I know you were out on Falkor when all of this hit, so you probably have a very interesting perspective as well.
Yeah, it was an interesting time because we actually, I think, pushed off the dock on International Women's Day 1 year ago. And that was when I think COVID was just sort of creeping into the East Coast and marching west. And so we were, I think, very lucky to be able to, carry out that cruise, not as planned, but still carry it out. It felt very strange, I think, to kind of know and understand that the world was completely changing. And I think in that first period, things were changing. You couldn't believe what you're hearing in this little kind of bubble, even though we're so well connected with internet and email and things like that. I think hearing about what was happening and not experiencing it was such a very strange experience. But the same time we were working so hard and doing all these things, so there wasn't time to sort of dwell on it a lot either. So really when the ship came back to the dock and we kind of walked off the ship, and within 15 minutes we're in an airport, and suddenly we have to learn how to travel again, and having these weird questions like, do I take my mask off to eat or not? Like, maybe I should just not eat until I get home. Like, there were all kinds of weird things, and learning to grocery shop in a different way. Just weird stuff that you take for granted. So yeah, it was a very strange time. But again, we've been so lucky here, and I really have a really humbling kind of feeling about that, because I do continue to Zoom and work with people all over the world, and it's kind of have a bit of survivor's guilt in a way, right? It's like, yes, my life is kind of normal, except we don't have conferences anymore and we don't travel and we spend a lot of time talking into computer screens. It's kind of what's happened. But yeah, I'm looking forward to not getting back to normal, because I think there are lots of things we don't want to go back to, and just slowing down a little bit, I think would will benefit everyone.
Yeah, sorry, Nerida, we lost you just for that last little bit of just like the last part of your sentence, so I didn't catch that. What was that?
I just said I think I was looking forward to sort of retaining a little bit of that slowdown maybe into the future would be great for everyone.
Yeah, definitely, I agree. We did have a question come in from the audience. It's a bit of a statement as well. It's from the Unknown Explorer, who I know watches our YouTube feed all of the time. She asks, here in the US, a lot of women have had to drop out of the workforce since COVID. I wonder if that's happening a lot in the STEM field as well. If you've all made observations about seeing coworkers leave their jobs.
In terms of the spaces that I work in, okay, so I've got a number of startups as well as my academic position, so I can sort of come at this. And in fact, you know, Nerida, we did hold an event last year. World of Drones and Robotics had its fourth event in the Brisbane Convention Centre, and we were hybrid. So everybody around the world could access it as well. And we had everyone from Arizona to Zimbabwe accessing the conference. But we did have 400 odd people come through the conference in a COVID-safe manner, one might remember, at the Brisbane Convention Centre. So that, though, has changed now. So events going forward in the event world will always be hybrid for the foreseeable. I feel like that's the thing. And that, for me, is really exciting because it means that people that could never afford to travel to go to conferences, which I think typically you don't see a lot of women at a lot of tech conferences. And I, in the past, have also felt nervous asking for money to attend conferences. I think it opens doors and it provides an egalitarian access in ways that may not have happened before financially. And also travel budgets are being slashed. And so that's the way forward. But the reason why I wanted to mention the events industry, because communication and getting together and having symposia and having big scientific meetings is really important. Networking for women's career paths is really important. I've always said your network is your net worth. So your network will lift you up. It will provide you opportunities. It will help protect you from redundancy. It will offer you doors to open when other doors close in your face. And we put a lot of time and effort in as women to be able to support each other. And I think networking and meeting different women that we've never met before is particularly of interest to me. So I miss the idea of the conference space as it was. And I'm really glad to see that that's going to be coming back. Here in Australia, by about Q3, Q4, we will have conferences again, the way we were having them a year and a bit ago. I think in the US, that's more likely to be Q2, 2022, that it really sort of starts to get back up. But the events industry is a very female-dominated industry. So I just wanted to put a little nugget in there in that JobKeeper here in Australia has kept the events industry on hold, but now they're getting warm and they're getting busy again. Tourism, obviously, domestic tourism is something that the Queensland government is particularly focusing on. Tourism, again, very female-heavy industry. The service industry, very heavy female industry. And I think that we can probably say, we know here in Australia, some sort of 70% of casual jobs are held by women. And during the COVID crisis, the first jobs that went were the casual jobs, because contractually, people had no obligations to pay anyone if there's no casual work happening, right? So part-time and casual work, I think, because they are more female dominated in their occupancy, has been hit harder by COVID. Women have lost their jobs. And it's a matter of now looking to see what the opportunities are to retrain women. If those jobs are no longer going to exist or not going to exist for a while, how do we retrain women into other jobs that are going to give them that flexibility that they wanted, and put that skills pipeline together? So, I mean, here in Queensland, the government has provided free TAFE, which is like community college. So free TAFE to under 25s. So if you're under 25 in Queensland, you can go and do a qualification for free. And the universities have got various courses like graduate certificates that were funded by the federal government to try and help retrain people. So yes, I think women have been disproportionately affected, but this isn't for us to sit there and clutch our pearls and worry about. This is for us to do something about. And so we need to look at where are the opportunities to get women into maybe more stable, more exciting, potentially STEM-based careers. Why can't we have women working more in cybersecurity and more across STEM? There's absolutely no reason. It's a matter of training. And so I think there'll be a really interesting discussion over the next 12 months as to how to rebuild that pipeline of female employment, women employment. And I'm just really interested to see what comes from that. But I think that STEM definitely has a part to play.
I love that, Catherine. I was just going to add that I don't know that I've seen or heard of as much females kind of completely dropping out of a STEM career, but I have seen some publications recently where women are not publishing as much as their male colleagues, for example. So they're not being as productive in their research lives because they're taking on some of the household burden. So I just wanted to put that out there. I don't necessarily have any commentary on it, but I have seen some publications about that where they're not necessarily kind of dropping out or losing their jobs, but they're just not being as productive as the males that are doing most of the publishing right now in the scientific literature.
Yeah, I'd also like to add to that, I guess, that it is those sort of small subliminal kind of cuts that you don't see so easily that are impacting people. So it might not be so obvious. They might still have a job or they might still be doing their PhD, but I think many students are really struggling in this. You know, some of them, their projects simply, they just can't carry them out. They can't carry out the planned field work and the things like that in that sort of short space of time. In Australia, our PhD program is sort of 3.5 years. And so it's been a very pressurized time for them. And a lot of them have lost that casual work that Catherine mentioned that helps keep them going. So I think we need to be mindful of those sorts of impacts that accumulate and trying to help out them, you know, somehow. And especially when it comes to sort of, you know, assessing candidates for jobs in the future, to be mindful of the time period and the impact that it's had on people.
I think those are all excellent points. We have time for one more question before we wrap up. This comes from Amara. Nerida mentioned the idea that science can happen anywhere. COVID has somewhat forced us to rethink the way we share science. How can we make science accessible to people everywhere? What does that require in terms of collaboration, funding, voices, etc.?
So I guess that's my responsibility. Go ahead, Allison.
No, go. I was just going to say that I could start and say in 2020, Schmidt Ocean Institute hosted its first entirely virtual research cruise. And some of the things that we noticed was that we had a lot more scientific participation on kind of the chats when we were discovering new species, because a lot of the scientists were just at home watching the YouTube with kind of the general public. And we ended up discovering some new species, and we also found some species that were found in new geographic regions. And we wouldn't have known that on the YouTube when we were doing the ROV dive if we hadn't had the scientists, you know, from Hawaii and the places in the US watching the YouTube. So even though we stream, you know, we've always streamed the YouTube dives to YouTube, I think we've had a lot more scientific participation virtually this year. So that's one thing that we would definitely look to continue to enhance and increase, is that the scientific party that's joining an expedition doesn't always have to be, you know, limited to the 12 people that are coming on board the ship, but we can certainly broaden the participation in the scientific work that's going on by enabling some more virtual access to the data and things that are being collected on the ship.
Yeah, I think there's sort of two parts to that question. In a sense, when we talk about, you know, science can be happening, it's both science being carried out, but also science being analyzed. It has many forms, and I think a lot of that kind of enhancing the remote participation and things like that, and thinking of you know, collaborating with people in a different way than you might have before really just takes a culture change. And I think in the same way where, you know, overnight we kind of totally rethought about how we carry out our work, like on Zoom, you know, it does help us sort of move into the future with thinking, how might we carry out collaborations, you know, if these other kinds of opportunities, you know, a marine biologist, that's already like a crazy thought, right? And it might never have occurred to a student that that's a thing. So I think now that we have these different ways, it's a matter of time and a matter of culture change, and highlighting, I think, when we are doing that, to show that it can be done in different ways.
I think that technology, I might be biased here though, but technology I think is a massive opportunity here. Technology can be an incredibly interesting connection, links and nodes, right? So how do we make science accessible to people everywhere? Citizen science engagement has proved to be reasonably successful. I think there's always new ways of doing that, that are based around not-for-profits and based around government organizations. I think that collaboration and funding is a really interesting one. As universities, the way universities collaborate with industry is getting better and is changing. And the way funding is going to happen from spin-off companies and IP generating revenue. In Australia, we're particularly good at R&D, not particularly good at the sea. So we need to start commercializing some of the research that we get. I mean, not a lot of people know that Australian science actually invented Wi-Fi. So anyone used Wi-Fi recently? Oh, are we using it right now? That's an Australian invention, right? So, I mean, Australia has always been very good at punching above its weight for some reason in the scientific world. It's just lots of very intelligent people working on some pretty gnarly problems. But the problem is commercialization. And I think that commercialization can sometimes be seen to be a dirty word by scientists. It's not necessarily the reason we get into it. And it's maybe linking nicely back to my conversation at the start, is that there's no shame in making a financially viable research project. There's no shame in having a financial return on investment from engaging with industry. I think voices is a really good one. So again, we're in this era now of mass social media. So where are the new David Attenboroughs? Where are the people that will be inspiring my children? What do they look like? Where are they? And how do we get that into a more pub talk type relationship? Again, I already said, we need to celebrate science the way we celebrate sport. We need science pages in our papers the way we have sports pages. We need to talk about the best teams and what they're working on, and the best celebrities inside science and what they believe and what they're working on. And we need to value science. And I think this might change because of COVID. We need to value science and scientists in ways we've never valued them before. It's the scientists that are going to get us out of this, you know. And I think that understanding Mother Nature as we have a future that will be how do we put this? The future is going to get harder because of climate change. So unless we can do something pretty damn quick about climate change in the next 10 years, my children might live in a place where we've only got 60 harvests left. Some people think we've only got 30 harvests left. We're talking mass famine in my children's lifetime when they're my age. Now that scares me witless. And the problem is, with the next billion human beings that we get on this planet, we're going to need to feed them. Right? So how do we combat population growth, the war on Mother Nature, and climate change augmented extreme weather events, such as we've just seen in Texas, that we've had across Australia when we were half on fire a year or so ago? We thought the bushfires was going to be the worst thing about 2020 here in Australia. That's what we honestly thought, that was going to be the worst that 2020 was going to give us. But the fire season is back upon us. You know, it has been on us. It's been all right. It's not been as bad this year as last year because we've had a La Nina. Now, what happens when our ocean currents start changing? They're already saying the melting of the polar ice caps is already affecting the Gulf Stream. I remember learning about that 25 years ago when I was in high school. And now we're seeing it. And now people are going, oh yeah, the scientists were right. So I think that there's going to be a need for less ivory tower and more direct engagement and empowerment of communities with knowledge. One thing that has upset me about the COVID crisis is the fake news proliferation. And the people don't trust the scientists or haven't trusted the scientists. And I think there's a science literacy and a data literacy thing that's been highlighted here that we need to do something about. And I think the work of the Schmidt Ocean Institute is particularly powerful because it takes us to the edges of what we know about our planet, which means it takes us to the edges about what we know about ourselves as a species. And I find that so inspiring. And the footage is so beautiful and so incredible. I just want to print it all out and just like live in one of those houses, just print it out like I'm a psycho, you know, just print it all out, put it around my house. Just so stunning and inspiring. And my children love to watch it, love to see nature documentaries. David Attenborough was my third parent, so maybe I'm biased in some of these respects, but I think David Attenborough should have been everyone's third parent from the 1970s and 80s, quite frankly. And so, yeah, so how do we do that? So we need voices. We need it in science fiction movies. We need it in documentaries on Netflix. We need it in the headlines. We need it in the papers. We need it on social media. We need the funny videos. We need the influencers. We need the Instagram. We need the Clubhouse. We need everybody talking about this, because effectively, how well we manage the next 10 years is going to set our children's lives and our planet's existence on a pathway that we will not be able to reverse. And I feel that pressure. And I feel like we need to do something now. And I think we're in a really good place. And the Schmidt Ocean Institute is in a really good place to do that. So thank you for all of your hard work at SOI. It's wonderful.
Thank you so much, Catherine. And thank you, such inspiring words. And it's honestly been an honor to host such an inspiring panel of women. Discussions like these are essential, and we hope that we have inspired some of our viewers today and encourage you all to know that there is space for you in whatever field you plan to work in the future. And there are women that will support and partner with you to create it when you encounter roadblocks. As we continue to openly discuss this important issue, it will become less necessary as we reach equality. Thank you all so much for sharing your time and experiences. We are also grateful to the National Australian Maritime Museum for facilitating this conversation. And with that, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Thank you for being here with us today.
Thanks, Hannah.